It's another early Mailbag Friday, so let's get to some questions from the listeners next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals in the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I am your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, we're on Odyssey, and YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and this show, I am based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, co-hosting, and a little bit of producing as well. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to win $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Well, as you can tell, I'm not in my typical podcasting room, and I probably should just be out front and say this. I'm recording this late on Thursday night. I'm still here at the studio, so I'm at work. I thought there'd be no better time to get it done than right now. I got an early flight, a very early flight on Friday. So if anything happens, breaking news-wise for the Royals, and you're wondering why we're not talking about it on Friday, well, let's just hope that it breaks here in the next 10 to 20 minutes or so we'll be able to talk about it. But I am recording this on Thursday. I'm not in my typical podcasting studio, so hopefully the internet connection can hold up. But still, it's going to remain the same. We're just going to be answering all the questions that were sent in from the listeners, whether that be on YouTube or that be on Twitter. So again, if you're that first-time listener, you can always send me questions to my Twitter handle at the below part of this page. And then you can also find us on YouTube and just respond to one of our episodes. And I'll try my best to make sure that I don't miss it. So question number one comes from Logan. One free agent and one trade candidate dark horse the Royals can approach this offseason. Well, it started off with a free agent dark horse. I like to categorize dark horse with free agency with spending a lot of money. That's the way I've always done it, because if it is a cheap option, I can't really consider it to be a dark horse. But one I'll throw my hat into the ring for, I'll say Alex Bregman. And I know it's going to excite a lot of Royals fans. I'm not saying it's likely. That's kind of the point of a dark horse. But the Royals do technically have an opening at third base. Michael Garcia can be that guy. I believe the Royals believe he's got a high ceiling. But Alex Bregman could be a top of the order bat or the middle of the order bat. And I think he would really move the needle for this offense. So to me, I think a free agent acquisition that would be very expensive, I might add, would be Alex Bregman, because I think he would fit nicely into this offense. So I'll say that for my free agent acquisition. As for a trade piece, I'm going to look more so toward a young and controllable piece, even though I think this guy would be a free agent after the end of 2025. I'm going to say it's Luis Rengifo. I know the Royals liked what he was able to do, and then he got hurt. So when he got hurt, it kind of took away his trade value a little bit. A light hitting infielder, I could say Luis Rengifo, or maybe even somebody like Luis Ariz, who's just had surgery, I believe, earlier today, because there was that previous interest. You've heard me say so many times that when there's interest, the Royals might be able to revisit it. Now, what those players would cost, maybe more than what the Royals would be willing to give up, but both those guys scream a lot of the same tendencies, and I feel like Luis Rengifo would be a little less expensive than Luis Ariz, of course, who's coming off of a batting title in the National League. All right, we'll see if we got any more coming here on YouTube. I don't believe we do. This one comes from David. I just saw an article talking about the Royals and should they pursue Gleyber Torres in free agency. What do you think about that? And would you rather have him or Massey at second base? Well, I said yesterday that I believe Michael Massey will be a big breakout player, but that isn't to say that I wouldn't be open to the idea of Gleyber Torres coming back. He's hitting, I think, .316 since the Yankees moved into the leadoff spot in mid-August. However, I don't think the Royals want to move Michael Massey off second base. And Gleyber Torres can pretty much only play second and shortstop, and you got Bobby Witt Jr. at short. I do not think Gleyber Torres would sign in Kansas City to play third base. I don't hate the idea because I think he'd be an upgrade absolutely at the leadoff position, but that would mean moving Michael Massey or somebody else in that lineup. And Michael Massey, I like at second base, and I like his defense. And I believe the Royals can look elsewhere other than Gleyber Torres for their leadoff spot and for somebody to play the infield. But don't hate the question is all at all coming from David. All right, that's enough for all the questions on YouTube. We got about 30 to get to on Twitter, and that's where we get the majority of our questions. This one comes from Kirk. What would be a reasonable return for Brady Singer? If he can't pitch in the playoffs as a starter, should we move him for a bat that can help us in 162 and in the playoffs? We talked about it in Thursday's episode, which I recorded earlier this morning, about Brady Singer being a trade chip, and I believe he has the most value of anybody the Royals would be considering to move. Because he is a starter that's coming off a good year, he was durable, made a lot of starts, ERA was good, command for the most part was good, and he's a bulldog. And the Royals would probably be preaching that about Brady Singer if they were looking to move him. I think there's a case in which you can capitalize on a team that wants to get over the hump and wants to get over the hump pitching-wise. A team that stands out to me would be the Cincinnati Reds. I think the Reds were a team that felt like if they just had a little bit more starting pitching depth, that could have put them over the top because they've also got some guys that missed the entire year due to injury that will be coming back in 2025. And it might be a little bit crowded, to be honest with you. There were a couple of guys that got brought up. I think TJ Friedel was brought up by one of our commenters on YouTube. I don't hate it. But if the Royals were to be looking to trade Brady Singer to somebody like Cincinnati, you might be able to leverage somebody like a Jonathan India. I know the Royals did have some form of interest last offseason, but the asking price was too high. You could also go back to Texas and look at somebody like a Josh Smith, who I thought was very good for Texas and was a snub in the All-Star game, was somebody who could hit at the top of the order, or you place him in to give you some depth at the bottom of the order. That wouldn't be a bad return, in my opinion, if you could package maybe another reliever in that. So if the Royals are going to sell high on Brady Singer, I would look for at least 2 major league pieces in return. And maybe the Royals do go that route this coming month or maybe the next few months leading into winter meetings. So good question there coming from Kirk. Rob asked if Wacha doesn't take the player option, does that keep us from using Singer to get a bat? I would say it's unlikely. If the Royals lose Michael Wacha, I don't think they'd be too high on trading Brady Singer because you don't want to replace 2 guys in the rotation when you don't really have anybody to take over that spot that's ready right now. So if they do lose Wacha, which right now I don't think they will, I think they're going to get a deal worked out with him because he loves it here in Kansas City and they love him. And that would give them that flexibility to maybe look into trading Brady Singer if they wanted to go that route. Caleb asked if the bullpen has Ursig, Bubic, Harvey, Serpa, Schreiber, and Lynch. That leaves 2 spots for Hernandez, Cruz, MacArthur, and Kyle Wright. Prospect promotions and potential free agent signings. Do you think MacArthur is a lock to make the roster with how crowded this is going to be next year? I don't think he's a lock because the Royals showed that in the postseason that bullpen was very stable. And MacArthur was hurt at the end of the year. And when you have a bullpen that shines after a guy gets hurt, I can't say that he's going to be a lock. If he does come back, I would expect him to be in a much lesser role, probably more of a 6th inning guy or a 7th inning guy, not pitching in the 8th or the 9th inning. And I still think his stuff is very good. If he wasn't healthy, that would tell a lot because the movement's there, that the strikeout stuff can be there. He just maybe wasn't cut out for a closer's role. So I don't think he's a lock, but I would put it over 50% that he's in this bullpen to begin next year. Ken asked if you bring back Wacha and trade Singer, who's the 4 and 5 in the rotation next year? Would it be call-ups or in-house, parentheses, Kyle Wright, or real trade option / free agency? If they bring back Wacha and they were to trade Singer, I think that would open up a spot for maybe Michael Lorenzen to return. I don't think they'd break camp with Noah Cameron being a starter, even though he was great for Omaha toward the end of the year. I don't see Daniel Lynch going back into the rotation, nor Kris Bubic. Kyle Wright's not going to be ready. So I would say it'd be likelier the Royals would go the free agent route, a cheap 1-year deal to pencil in as the number 5 starter, and you bump Alec Marsh to the 4. But I don't think that they've got anybody in the minor league system that would be ready to take that spot for a team that's expecting to go back to the playoffs, at least so early on in the year. Elijah has the question of who do you think could become a full-time player for the Royals that was only in for a certain amount of matchups this year? I think the guy that has a best chance to be an everyday player, maybe Gavin Cross. I'll pull from the minor league system here just because the outfield depth is not very good right now. And if somebody went down to injury or wasn't performing and the Royals don't spend an outfield target, then I think Gavin Cross is the most major league ready at this point in time to take over every single day. But he's got to start spring training strong, which he did last year. He's got to start down in AAA or AA, wherever he might finish out, or wherever might finish out spring training at. He's got to start the year strong in April, and then he might get that chance a little bit later on in the season. But if that does count as an answer, I'm going to go with Gavin Cross there. Chuck asked, what's the revenue hit from Bally going dark? I do want to do a little bit more of a deep dive into this because it's such a obscure thing to talk about in this podcast, because it's tough to get all the revenue stream stuff and the bankruptcy part of Bally and where the Royals might be televised next year. But I do want to give a better answer to you right now. Quite honestly, I'm just not 100% sure on what it's going to be. I'm not certain on what it's going to be. So I do want to do more of a deep dive into that, talk to some different people on what it might be. But all I can say is that with Bally Sports Kansas City not happening anymore, I can't say that I hate it, because I did not think the Bally product was very good in 2024. As from what a lot of my followers have said, they would agree with that statement. Okay, we'll take our first break of the show. When we come back, still a lot of questions to get into next on a Mailbag Friday. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our first sponsor today and one of our newer sponsors in Hims. Hims is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. Hims provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable hard mints and Viagra and Cialis and their generics for up to 95% cheaper. The process is 100% online, so there's no need for uncomfortable doctor visits. Just answer a series of questions on their site, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. If prescribed, your medication ships directly to you in discreet packaging for free. No insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. So start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. HIMS.com/lockedon. So go get started today. You don't need to worry about it being public or those uncomfortable talking points at the doctor's office. Just get yourself covered with HIMS. We got more questions again, too, over on Twitter. Don't want to waste any time here. And again, if you're just now tuning in and you skipped a little bit, I recorded this on Thursday night. So if you're wondering why I didn't talk about something breaking, if it happened on Friday, that's why. I'll be going out of town. I'm going to San Francisco to visit some family and also check out the Chiefs and 49ers on Sunday. So I'll be very busy, but wanted to make sure we got to all 5 episodes this week. Aiden asked, how realistic is it that JJ doesn't feel the price is right for a leadoff hitter and stays with Massey at leadoff, and instead JJ signs 2 middle-of-the-order bats instead of a leadoff hitter and a middle-of-the-order bat? I don't hate this idea because Michael Massey looked good in the postseason at the leadoff spot, and JJ Picollo kind of walked back the idea of saying, well, we're going to go out there and get a leadoff hitter at the top of our shopping list, because I don't think he wanted to pigeonhole himself and guaranteeing to the fan base, hey, we're going outside the organization to find a leadoff hitter. But I do think they would prefer to go outside the Royals organization to find their leadoff hitter, because that was a huge issue for the team this year. They were second to last, I believe, in OPS. The leadoff spot, only ahead of the White Sox. And I think they were dead last in OBP, if I'm not mistaken. So that is absolutely the area of concern for this lineup. They need somebody to get on base and have legs to run the bases ahead of Bobby Witt Jr. and Vinny Pasquantino and Salvador Perez. I like Michael Massey. I just don't see him being a traditional leadoff hitter because he doesn't generate enough walks. He's much more of a number 6 hole hitter or number 7 hole hitter, and I think he would thrive there. But if they don't spend on a leadoff hitter, I'll be honest with you, I think they would go the trade route. I just don't see Maikel Garcia or Michael Massey being the leadoff hitter in 2025. Jason asked, when do you think the Royals and Bubic decide whether he goes back into the rotation? This seems important if we were to go to another bullpen arm. I think internally right now they do have the answer, and I'm not sure they'll make it public until right before spring training. They would probably tell Kris Bubic right now, hey, we feel like you're going to be in the rotation next year. Start stretching yourself out. Start preparing for that. So I believe the organization and Kris Bubic know, but to the public, I don't think we would know until they'd go into camp, because they would line up the rotation, and based on the workload for certain guys, we would know pretty quickly if Kris Bubic is going to be in the rotation or not. But the vibe I get from after the season, I think Kris Bubic is going to stay in the bullpen and not get stretched out into the rotation. Andrew has 2 questions. Number 1, does Jonathan Bowen have a future with this team, or does he seem like a non-tender candidate? I was hopeful, but not seeing him when the pen struggled was a bad sign. And number 2, what do you think of Abraham Toro as a cheap free agent bat? Looked great before getting injured. And could he be the leadoff guy? Well, with Jonathan Bowen, I don't see him being a non-tender candidate. He is more of an older prospect, but I could see him bouncing back and forth between Omaha and Kansas City next year. You never can have too much pitching depth because injuries are going to happen to your bullpen. I think the Royals need to figure out whether he's a bullpen guy or a starter, and I'd much rather him throw out of the bullpen because of his stuff. I mean, when he had that short start in Toronto when he had to fill in for Alec Marsh way back in April, I think it was, he was throwing hard. He was throwing 98, 99, but it was a hittable 98, 99. Would love him to fine-tune some stuff because I think he could be a little bit of a weapon for the Royals at some point in 2025 out of the bullpen. And as for Abraham Toro, he wasn't on my list, but I wouldn't hate it. If it's a cheap one-year deal, I say maybe have a little bit of competition going into spring training. So I absolutely wouldn't hate it. He just wasn't really on the top of my list for leadoff candidates. And we might even dive deeper into that in some of our episodes next week. JHB asked, who do you think could be traded to acquire pitching or a bat? Touched on this a little bit in yesterday's episode. I think that Brady Singer would probably have the most value there. Maybe somebody like Carlos Hernandez could be an option. If Daniel Lynch wanted to be a starter, you could leverage him as a starter to somebody out there, or you could be looking into your minor league system and flip somebody like a Drew Waters, a Nick Pratto to try to find somebody who's blocked elsewhere in a minor league system that could compete for a spot in spring training. But I'm curious because I have far more faith now in the Royals scouting department and who's going to be looking for talent where maybe nobody else is looking than I did in previous years. So I'm fascinated to see how they would approach the trade route going into 2025. George asked, any chance Gavin Cross sniffs the majors this coming season? I was disappointed not to see him on the Arizona Fall League roster. If not him, do you see any rookies with potential for 2025? Gavin Cross, I think, will make his debut in 2025 because he really made tremendous strides in 2024. I think he'll be close enough to have a chance to compete in spring training, and I think we'll see him early on in Omaha. And at that point, it comes down to, can he hit in Omaha, and could there be an opening in Kansas City? But I think even if it's not as a starter, he will be playing in Kansas City at some point just because, he's getting to that point in his prospect status where you got to see what you got. But I do think he's going to need to be more of a threat defensively because the Royals are going to want to have guys that can play defense down in AAA. And that's one way I think with the Royals, you can really stand out as having good defense and also being able to hit. That goes against what I've always said about Drew Waters because he had good defense and he could hit, but there was a really big hole in his swing when he got up to the major league level. And as for other rookies, a lot of pitchers that I think could have a chance. I think that Steven Zobak could have a chance. I think that Noah Cameron absolutely is going to make his debut in 2025. I think somebody like Javier Vaz could make his debut in 2025. He's one of my favorite prospects out there. But there's a few guys that I think will be in Omaha to start the year, and it won't take them that long to get up to Kansas City. But at the same time, you don't want a ton of prospects coming up in 2025 because that would mean either A, a lot of your starters are getting hurt, or B, a lot of those guys are struggling that you were counting on to make a playoff push in 2025. This one comes from Mouse. Keep Garcia or not, and what outfield bats are available, and would you trade Freddie? Garcia is going to be kept. I just don't know if he's going to be a starter. Outfield bats that are available. I gave a list in Monday's episode about outfield free agent targets, so you can always go back to that. I think I had Tyler O'Neill, Jurickson Profar, Michael Conforto, Jesse Winker's another name. Trade options are tough because you never really know who's available until you get to the winter meetings. And as for Freddie Fermin, I would say hold on to him at least for one more year. And then in 2026, you're probably hoping that Blake Mitchell or Carter Jensen is ready to go to be a catcher in Kansas City. But Freddie Fermin's a great backup catcher. He hits better than most backup catchers, so I think you really have a cheap gem right now at the catching position for Kansas City. So, no, I'm not looking into trading Freddie Fermin unless somebody would offer you a really nice haul coming up here at the winter meetings. Nick asked thoughts on Ha-Seong Kim. Could he play third? Yeah, I do like the idea. I believe Preston Farr, Royals Miners on Twitter, had this idea as well. I think it'd be a fantastic pickup. I just think he's not going to be available to begin the year, if I'm not mistaken. I'd have to go do another look into that, but I think he'd be missing the first half of the year. That's where you could strike, though, for a trade. So if you go out there and get him, you're not having to give up as much because he will be banged up. I do want to say he's missing the first part of the year, or at least a first month or two of the season. But I do like that idea, and you could roll with Michael Garcia at third until he would be healthy and ready to go. But I don't hate it. He absolutely could play third, and he absolutely would solve the leadoff spot for the Royals. All right, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, we'll wrap it up with the remaining questions on this Mailbag Friday next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can always find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our final sponsor and our title sponsor today in Prize Picks. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. And Prize Picks is the best way to get in on the action in sports in over 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. It's also the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy. So your lineups stay in place even if one of your players gets injured. If your player leaves in the first half and doesn't return, Prize Picks keeps your lineup live. It's also the best place to get real money sports action. Join 10 million users and sign up today. And if you sign up today, you can get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup over at Prize Picks. We still got about 10 to 15 questions to get into, so more of a rapid fire for our final segment in our early edition of a Mailbag Friday. This one comes from Stefan. Why do we hear the narrative of must acquire an outfield bat? I feel 2 bats are warranted out there. I do think that the Royals love Kyle Isbell's defense, so I don't see Kyle Isbell going anywhere for 2025. I think he's going to be the everyday center fielder. Hunter Renfroe, I think, is going to accept the player option and come back to Kansas City. And I think the Royals believe that the healthy version they saw was when he went on that tear of hitting, 315, 320, had the OBP in the 370s. That's a good everyday right fielder, but he's got to stay healthy, and that will absolutely be a focal point for Hunter Renfroe in 2025. That's why I think they might just be looking to replace one spot, which would be MJ Melendez. And I just think MJ Melendez becomes the 4th outfielder for this team. And it's not bad to have 20 home run pop coming off your bench for a pinch hitting role late in the game. He thrived in a couple of those spots throughout 2024. So that's why I think we hear the narrative of going after just one outfield bat and not 2. Royals Report has projected outfield for next year. Yeah, I'm going to say Kyle Isbell in center, Hunter Renfroe in right. And then for left field, I think any of the following of a Tyler O'Neill or a Jurickson Profar or a Jesse Winker, Michael Conforto, those kind of feel like the likeliest options, but maybe they're also looking completely differently. And maybe they do view that MJ Melendez is a left fielder and they go big on somebody like an Alex Bregman to play third base. But I do think the Royals are going to make a splash at either left field or third base, and that would be one of their bigger bats in the lineup. Bobby Witt Jr. Burner asks, how do I survive until opening day? Well, if you're a football fan and a basketball fan, I think you'll be just fine. But I'll be honest with you. This week has sucked. I've enjoyed doing these episodes, but it does suck to know that we're not getting Royals baseball, like an actual game, until February for spring training, but we don't get a real game until April. I mean, that's the rest of the football season, all of the basketball season, and then we get Royals baseball. So it stings. But if you are a basketball and a football fan, I would say you'll be just fine. If you're not and you're just a baseball diehard, maybe just play some video games, play some MLB The Show and keep the baseball vibes going, or go back and watch old games. I've known to do that a handful of times when I get really bored in the winter and I'm longing for Royals baseball, but I'm with you there. It does suck to be without Royals baseball for the first time in a long time. Steven has 3 questions. 1, do the Royals buy out Renfroe? 2, do you think Singer could be traded? And 3, will Cags be invited to spring training? For number 1, I do not think the Royals will buy out Renfroe. I think that he is going to be back. Number 2, I do think that Singer could be traded, but right now I'm going to lean toward no, because they're going to see how Michael Wacha handles his opt-out situation. And number 3, I think that Caglione will be invited just to see how he handles some pitching at the spring training level. And I think he could benefit being around a lot of the pros there. So I think he will be invited, but of course, I do not think he'll make the team coming out of camp. Bobby Witt Jr.'s bat asked, what can I do next week to supplement no Royals baseball? I would say watch some of the postseason games. I've still enjoyed doing that. And then just gear up for football and basketball, man. I've kind of had to shift to that, just working in sports radio. So I've got my focus now on the Chiefs, and I've got my focus on the 3 local teams here in Kansas City. So that's the best way to do it. But also, I've gone back from time to time and watched the highlights of some great Royals games. That Mariners comeback is always a fun one. When they had that Cleveland series toward the end of the year to get into first place, watching some of those games were fun. I've watched some of the playoff wins, gone back and watched a few innings, actually, of the Baltimore series and that Game 2 win in New York. Do anything, man, to supplement it, because now at least the sting is gone a little bit, and you can really look back and cherish what was such a great 2024 for the Royals. Wacha off season. I love how you've just changed the handle every single week, it feels like. But this question is, how would you feel about a Christian Yelich trade? Highly doubt that the Brewers would move on from him, but would you personally like the idea? Just a fun thought. I would love the idea. I wonder what the price would be on Yelich, because he was hurt toward the end of last year and he's getting up there in age. So do the Brewers look to move him because they're going with their youth movement, Sal Frelick and Jackson Chourio being in their outfield? Does Christian Yelich still fit that mold in Milwaukee? I think he does, but I would love for the Royals to at least entertain the idea, because I think he would be an absolute upgrade for a left field spot in Kansas City. So love that outside the box thinking right there. Gary asked, how come Lorenzen isn't getting much talk as a starter to resign next year? In his short time, I thought he was much more reliable than Singer. Yeah, I mean, we talked about it in Thursday morning's episode that I think Michael Lorenzen would be a great candidate to bring back on a one-year deal. Now, the question will be, does he want a 2-year deal? Because of what he looked like in Kansas City in a playoff push. He pitched out of the bullpen in the postseason. I would love Michael Lorenzen to be back, because I think the Royals found something in him that Texas wasn't doing, and it resulted in a sub-2 ERA for the Royals. It's just a matter of staying healthy for him. So I think there should be more chatter, because I would love to have Michael Lorenzen back in a Royals uniform. Next one comes from RJ. Any chance the Royals trade for Brent Rooker? I would say it's a low chance, just because I think Oakland wants to have him around. I mean, he's got so many years of control. He's coming off a great season. He's their star player offensively next to Lawrence Butler, and I think they do want to build around him a little bit. So right now, I would say it's a low chance that the Royals could trade for Brent Rooker, because I don't think they've got the resources to trade for Brent Rooker. Briley asked, how long do you think Salvi will play for us before he retires? I think that he will be on this roster for, I'll say, 3 more years. I think 3 more years would be a good cutoff point for him, because I also don't want to see Salvador Perez completely bottom out as a big leaguer and then the league tell him when he's done playing. But I also think Salvador Perez will want to keep playing as long as he is healthy and he's enjoying the game, which feels like for him, in terms of enjoying the game, that's never going to go away. But right now, if I had to give a guesstimate, I'll say he's on the roster for 3 more years. I don't think he'll play anywhere else. He will retire a Royal, and someday there'll be a statue outside the stadium for Salvador Perez. Coke Reagans asked, we have a crowded spot at first and catcher with Salvi, Vinny, Fermin, and Cags coming along. Someone has to go. Who would it be? Well, if Cags comes up at some point in 2025, Salvi will still be behind the plate. Vinny will just be moved to DH, and Cags will be the first baseman. So it doesn't really have to be anybody, in my opinion, because you can have all those guys on the roster if Caglione is there. I think once Caglione is the full-time first baseman, you would just put Vinny as the full-time DH, and Salvi can still catch, and you just have less rotation, I think, of Salvi playing first and Vinny playing first. You would have more of a set lineup, in my opinion. RB Carr asked, better trade options for a leadoff hitter, Rengifo from the Angels or Arise from San Diego? They're kind of the same to me, and I think Rengifo would be cheaper, so I think I'll side with Luis Rengifo in that answer. Marty asked, how about Singer and a prospect to the O's for Jordan Westburg? I don't think the Orioles would move Jordan Westburg. I think they view him as their long-term piece at second base. And Brady Singer does have trade value. I don't think that much for Baltimore. Matt Vernon asked, it's pretty clear at this point that Zumwalt can't make the young guys any better since he's been there for years, and they went and got 3 vets rather than letting the young guys play. Question is, how high are the chances they fire Zumwalt and hire Kevin Seitzer? I don't think they're going to fire Alex Zumwalt at all. I give it a 0% chance, because J.J. Picollo said the only way we'd replace guys on the staff is if they got promoted to other jobs. And I think Alex Zumwalt and Keone Duren, those guys, they're going to be back. And if one of them does leave, then I think that J.J. Picollo will give a call to Kevin Seitzer, because they've got a good relationship, and they could bring him in for a certain type of role for this offense. But right now, I don't think Alex Zumwalt is going anywhere. Jeff asked, what percentage chance would you give MJ Melendez to be on the opening day lineup in 2025? How about in the opening day roster? I'll put it at 40% as an opening day starter, and I would put it at 95% that he's on the opening day roster. And last question here. Satchel's Page asked thoughts on a couple trade pieces, batting wise, excuse me. I got all my tongue twisters in there. Lawrence Butler, pre-arbitration next season. Luis Robert, $15 million left on his deal. Jake Berger, pre-arb next season. And Brent Rooker last year of arbitration. Brent Rooker, I just give it a low chance because I don't think the Royals have the resources. Jake Berger, I wouldn't hate it. He's just a defensive liability. Luis Robert, I don't know if the White Sox would trade in division. That's why the Royals couldn't get Tommy Pham in the first place, because I don't think the White Sox were willing to trade Tommy Pham to the Royals. And Lawrence Butler, I think Oakland's going to build around him. I think they view him as the star for the next 5 years there, at least until his rookie deal is up, and then they would be looking into moving him. So I don't think any of those guys would have a interest from the Royals. I think they would love the idea of somebody like a Lawrence Butler or Luis Robert, but those guys I just don't see as likely options for the Royals. But don't hate the question. Those were all, well thought out answers for who the Royals could be looking into, because they absolutely would upgrade this lineup. I just don't see it being likely for the Royals. All right, that's going to do it for another edition of a Mailbag Friday on Locked On Royals. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. And thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, find Locked On MLB as baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every aspect of the playoff picture. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Well, that'll do it for us for the week. We'll be off all weekend long. I will be in San Francisco, enjoying some time out there with family. So we'll be back on Monday evening. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.